Christians believed in, spreading the gospel, but they also believed in forceful conversions. They also, you had the Crusades, and you had the Salem witch trials, and you had, you can go on and on and on about the long list of violent decades and decades and decades that, Christians unleash on various groups. There was a shooting that took place in Australia at a beach where two men who were Muslim, they killed, at the time of this recording, 15 people at I believe it was the first night of Hanukkah, or like a celebration related to Hanukkah. And so, we assume that almost all of these individuals, or at least most of them, were Jewish at the beach. This has led to a lot of discussion, some interesting conversation about immigration, Islam, Muslims, and whether or not Muslims or Islam is compatible with the West. And I have found a lot of the commentary about this to be fascinating. I am fascinated by Islam, just as an outsider looking in, or just being quite frank with you. I grew up Baptist, so I have a Christian background, though I'm no longer a Christian. I don't identify as a Christian anymore. So that's my background. But I found the conversation interesting because it seems like many people who are on the Muslims and Islam is simply incompatible with the West. Their reasoning seems to be that Islam at its foundation is a violent religion that is based off of subjugation, domination, and confrontational, right? There was even a dude who was on trigonometry. I don't know the name of this. I believe he was a historian. It was a 2-hour conversation. He's going in about who Muhammad was and how Muhammad was a warlord, and it was all fascinating to hear, right? But I find that argument to be a little bit empty, if I'm being honest, because I think people don't realize, or they forget how much violence and stuff like that is also found in the Old Testament of the Bible, which is also, the Torah as well. There's some dark stuff in there that people forget about. You have the laws in there that justify slavery. It gives how you're supposed to be a slave master. They have laws on how that you're allowed to beat them as long as you don't kill them. They have shit like that. You're not really supposed to make a slave out of your, Hebrew brethren for all that long. But if it's a foreigner, hey man, you can have that person for life. You have that stuff going on. You have the stuff with women, of course, second class citizens and property. Women were pretty much property, similar to a man's donkey or a man's his slave, his ox, right? Like the wife was like right there. I think it's one of the commandments where it says you shouldn't cover your neighbor's wife and his ox and his ass, right? Those are all properties, right? That's how women were viewed at this time within this religion. That's property. So you have that stuff. Of course, you have the genocide that happened where, God promised the Jews and the Hebrews that the promised land was for them, though he forgot that there was people already living there. And so they had to go, it's for you, but you got to go get rid of them people and kill all of them. And while you do that, if the women live and they're virgins, you can make them wives. So you have some sexual slavery going on there. It's some horrific stuff if you read it. It's pretty bad. And somehow most Christians, most Jews, not only wouldn't defend these things, maybe they would, but they would try their best to kind of, soft shoe it or make it seem not as bad as it is. But really, if you talk to them, they believe that most of that stuff is just not applicable to the life that they live now. And so if they want to be the best Christian that they can be now, and they focus on, if you're a Christian, it's about being like Jesus, right? Yeah, the Old Testament exists, and you kind of have to pay lip service to it, really. But honestly, if you talk to most Christians, and if they could get rid of the Old Testament, they absolutely would. The Old Testament makes it much more harder to be a Christian than it otherwise should be, because you have to kind of pay lip service to this bullshit. And Jews, through their own type of systems and culture and, rabbis and stuff through the years, they've kind of gotten rid of a lot of following that old stuff of, property laws and slaves and, it's not relevant anymore, right? So how did that happen? Well, Christians had Jesus, and that helped a lot. But what really happened, because even the early years of Christianity looks nothing like it looks today, and people keep forgetting that, right? Again, Judaism, early years of Judaism looks totally different than it does today, and people keep forgetting that, right? So even after Jesus, let's just focus on Christianity, right? Christianity and Islam. Even after Jesus, right, who kind of got away from all of that stuff, and hey, this is backwards. Let's focus more on forgiveness and love, and yada yada yada. Christians were violent. Christians believed in spreading the gospel, but they also believed in forceful conversions. They also you had the Crusades, and you had the Salem witch trials, and you had. I mean, you could go on and on and on about the long list of violent decades and decades and decades that Christians unleash on various groups. Some of it in self-defense, some of it not in self-defense, some of it in the name of spreading Christianity, some of it in the name of money. I'm not judging Christians, don't get your butt tight. I'm just telling the truth, right? Yeah, that happened. So how did Christians become significantly less violent today than towards the earliest decades and years after Jesus was crucified? It had nothing to do with Christians. It had everything to do with non-Christians. It was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, which came about, I'm drawing a blank right now. I'll put the year, the time frame here. But the Enlightenment came about, and it really questioned and it forced people within churches and outside of it to really question theology, to question this idea of divine rulership, to question the concept of, the Pope, or there being no separation between church and state, to question taking the Bible literally, right? To question how moral are these laws and these scriptures that you're following, right? You really believe that it's justifiable for you to have a slave? To be a slave owner? How? Why? Because it's in the Bible? Okay. Well, defend your position, actually, right? Give me your best argument as to why you should be a slave owner, and I, the agnostic or the atheist, the secularist, will give you my argument as to why this is a deplorable practice and you should stop, right? And so you have these conversations and this tension, and what came on the other side of that was a revamp of the religion. And so people were still, converting to being Christians, but they focused much more on New Testament than Old Testament, right? They focus more on forgiveness and being kind and being charitable than they did on forcibly spreading Christianity and following the law, right? It was much more carrot, less stick. And then these newer Christians, which again looked nothing like the older Christians, would go on after being baptized in the name of secularism and critical thinking and reason, right? That was the Holy Trinity that they were baptized in. These newer Christians were able to create societies that were less susceptible to being dragged down by religious dogma, right? And again, this still took time. Because you still had, if you had a child out of birth, you were, viewed as a despicable woman. People were very superstitious, anti-science. They believed that evolution wasn't real, but now today you have Christians who believe in evolution, right? So again, even after the Enlightenment, it was still kind of a process to get Christianity where it is today. And so what it really needs to happen with Islam and Muslims is they just need their own version of an enlightenment. They need to be challenged on their religion. They need to defend their religion in the same way that Christians were forced to defend slavery and the subjugation of women and viewing them as property and genocide and, the ethics of, going on crusades and whatnot, right? Muslims, their text has to be put on trial by people who are looking to enlighten, looking to introduce a secular aspect to their societies, right? And I think this has to happen within the Muslim world. I don't think Westerners can actually do this where they, travel to Muslim countries and try to, create some false second enlightenment. Like, that's not going to happen. What needs to happen is you need to have Muslims within the Middle East who were raised Muslim. Maybe they're still Muslim and, in culture and identity, but not really in religious practice. They have to go in and challenge these texts. Now, it's always fascinating how people who challenge these things and no longer believe it still remain part of the religion. How that works, I don't know. Again, that was me as well, where I didn't believe none of that stuff about either slavery and that being righteous, or the concept of a chosen people was always dumb as fuck to me. Right? But I still called myself a Christian for years until I finally was like, this label doesn't fit me at all anymore. So that's what needs to happen. And when that does happen, then they will be compatible with the West in the same way that Christianity is compatible now, Judaism now, because they were forced to leave behind the parts of their text that were despicable. It's not really about the people. It's more about the fact that they haven't, and this could be due to the fact that Islam is the latest of the Abrahamic religions, right? I think it became a thing like 600 AD or 650 AD, something like that, right? And so they're later to the party, but that's all that really needs to happen. So let me know what you think about this video down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I think we will be having a lot more conversations in 2026 about Islam and Muslims, primarily because of the drastic population decrease within Western countries and increase amongst Muslim populations. So it's just unavoidable at this point, right? So, but again, I would love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, deuces.